The number one reason why hard cases don't heal that I've had is this.
Today I spoke with Dr. Josh Axe about his heartbreaking story of a spinal cord injury that nearly thwarted him of the ability to walk. He discusses his path of recovery, which involved a number of things, but as you can imagine, it was very challenging from a psychological perspective. And this gave birth to a book, Think This, Not That, that's actually a New York Times bestseller, which I feel holds some really important keys in terms of if you've been suffering, and certainly I would argue that Josh was suffering quite a bit, your mindset can be crucial for if you're able to recover or not. And Josh's background as a DC, a doctor of natural medicine, a nutritionist, the founder of dr.josh.com and a number of supplements. He's also written books on the leaky gut or leaky gut, essential oils, the keto diet, amongst others. A healthy guy with a background steeped in health gets waylaid by this injury, and conventional doctors told him he may not ever be able to walk again. And he's back on the mend. He's at 80%, and we'll discuss this in the conversation today. He did need quite aggressive antibiotic use, and so he discusses how he kept his gut healthy while overcoming a spinal infection that required high-dose antibiotics. And again, the mindset that really helped him get through the fact that he was literally crawling for a while during this, and it was months until he could walk again. So both heartbreaking, but I think empowering at the same time. And I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Josh Axe. Well, Dr. Josh Axe, welcome back to the show, my friend. And I wish it was under better circumstances, but boy, you have a lot to share with us.
Yeah, well, Dr. Michael, hey, thanks so much for having me here. Good to reconnect here. And I'm happy to share sort of my past couple years, how crazy it's been, and also hopefully it helps people heal themselves along the way, because I think there's a lot of lessons in gut health specifically that people can learn from sort of a lot of the stuff that I just went through.
Yeah, well, let's start there, because when you sent me the email about this sort of healing crisis that you were recently hit with, it's pretty jarring, and I'm sure you learned a whole lot, as I know you have a book coming out about mindset as medicine, and boy, with what happened to you, I'm sure you really learned that more than maybe most ever have. But yeah, I mean, tell us about what happened.
Yeah, so this was about not quite 2 years ago, a year and 9 months ago or so, and I went and got stem cell done, and something went wrong. And I want to mention too, I had injured my back years before lifting weights, and I went and got stem cell done in my back and my disc because I had a torn disc, herniated disc, and it helped tremendously. Got me back to like 95%. I still had this little bit of a nagging issue, and thought, okay, if I get this done one more time, I'll probably be back to 100%. Well, when I got it done afterwards, it just didn't feel right. And then for the next months, it felt worse and worse and worse. Finally, one day I woke up and I just couldn't walk. I mean, the pain was so excruciating. My family and I were living between Nashville, Tennessee and Puerto Rico. We were in Puerto Rico, and I had to have an ambulance come pick me up, bring me in to get an MRI. And the report came back that I had an infection that it was in my disc, but it also had migrated into my bone, my vertebra L5, and then there was an abscess by the spinal cord of the infection, so it really spread. And so I had to take a medical flight to Florida from Puerto Rico, and I'm on a gurney, they're lifting me in and out, bringing me in. I see an infectious disease specialist, and he said, Josh, listen, he said, this is a really serious infection, it's really spread. He said, listen, best case scenario, if we treat this, we do it right. He said, best case scenario is even with all the right things, you're going to have chronic pain the rest of your life, and you're going to be the first person to know when bad weather comes through. And he said, worst case scenario, said this could kill you, but more likely, I think, is that this could leave you with a permanent disability, and because there's a lot of damage here probably. He said this is really damaging to the L5 vertebra, to the disc, to this whole area. You may have to have rods put in at some point. And so that's what he told me. And then he said, what I'm going to recommend is you do around 12 weeks of antibiotics, 6 weeks of IV, another 6 weeks of oral. And I said, okay. And then I went home, and for about 48 hours, I just emotionally was, just in a very hard place mentally. I had felt like, one, I didn't have to get this done, and it was a some sort of medical mistake. And I, but after, and by the way, there were emotions I never experienced before I experienced. Like I never felt real despair, hopelessness, depression at that extent. And then after about 48 hours, I realized, you know what? Like my God is bigger than this. I really just tapped into my faith and believed that I was going to be healed, that I was going to be a walking miracle. And that I just needed to do
Right.
everything I could on my end in order to heal and let God do the rest. So that's really what I started focusing on. And, um, and so I also did some research though on antibiotics because I realized that 12 weeks of an antibiotic would be very, very hard on my body. In addition, I also wasn't going to be stupid. I realized that the infection in that area, we had to go and take care of that. But I read a study up on hyperbaric chambers. And there's a study done with people with spinal infection, and it found that if you do hyperbaric chamber at the same time of these antibiotics, you can cut your time down to just 30 days of antibiotics from the 3 months. And
It's so
so I
funny you
went,
say
and
that,
that's
Josh, because I'm literally speaking with a medical director of a HBOT clinic in like an hour because this is something I see so much potential in. So it's funny that we're synced up on that.
yeah. And there were several studies. In fact, the best studies I found, period, on what to do for spinal infections, in addition to antibiotics, was hyperbaric chamber.
Mm,
And so I went and I found a clinic. They do hard shell hyperbaric chambers. I got in at 2.5 ATA for 2 hours, 5 days a week.
yep.
And in the study, I found that they essentially did the same thing for 30 days in a row, and there 0% of the people. And that was a small scale study done on around 20 to 30 people, but 0% of people had a recurrence of infections, completely killed it. And so I did that. In addition to that, I went and got some IVs. I got IVs with silver and ozone and a lot of nutrients.
Yeah.
And so I followed this plan along with the antibiotic for a month of an IV, and at the end of 30 days, I think the infection was totally gone. About 2 weeks in, I started feeling a little bit better. Let me say this though, like my back was so bad and the infection was so strong that, I mean, I didn't walk for an entire year. It took me a year before I could walk, or at least 10 months before I could walk.
Wow.
And then 2 months then on a walker.
So even though the
And
HBOT was helpful, it was a reduction of pain that was pretty notable, but the pain was still residual and marked enough that
well,
walking was
well,
impaired.
well, here's something that I knew, but I didn't experience. I never experienced before, at least and I didn't know to the full extent, is how much longer it takes a disc to heal compared to
Wow.
other areas because it has such limited blood supply.
Right.
I mean, the blood supply is almost nothing, and so that's the real challenge.
So it wasn't the
And so,
infection, it was the damage in the wake of the infection that took a while to repair.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Okay.
it just took a long time,
Yeah.
and so I would just like every day I just laid in bed and then I would crawl and get into a pool. I could crawl. I couldn't sit though. Sitting was almost was incredibly painful too. So
Mm.
so I did that, and I learned so much throughout this process. I learned even more about gut health. I mean, I've spent a lot of time like you have, working with patients, reading medical journals, but with my own gut, knowing I was going to be on antibiotics a month, I had to figure out, well, how do I not destroy my gut? How do I restore my gut microbiota? And so I'd
Mm.
love to share some of the things I did because I think it would really help a lot of people. In order to, well, and also there's a difference between IV and oral. IV is still hard on your gut, but it's harder on your cells than oral. It's harder on the mitochondria, whereas oral is harder on the gut. Um, but I ended up doing a lot of high dose probiotic and FMT. Okay, I'm sure your audience knows, or some of them might know fecal matter transplant therapy. I did
Mm.
that. This is something where you can sort of test for a donor, and you take their fecal matter, their poop, and
Yeah, and who
you
did you, if you
can
don't mind,
either.
who did you use in terms of? I know there's different banks, and some of these you have to be not in the U.S., some you can be in the U.S. I haven't reappraised this in probably 2 years, so I'm wondering what options are out there. Has this become
Yeah.
more sort of commercially available?
Yes, yeah. So there are really three options. And by the way, I'm going to have to, two of them, it's been so long, I'm trying to remember the name. I'll be able to find it because I still have their contact info. Probably one of the most notable people in the US is Dr. Shepard, and he's in Tampa, Florida. So if
Okay.
people want to look somebody up, he's very well known. There also is a group out of South America, and they are who I use this time. Now, I'd recommended Dr. Shepard in the past, and I think he's a great option. I had a nurse practitioner that I was working with who had this connection, and they do a lot of testing, a lot of lab testing, very credible. And so I worked with them. And there is a group now that will sell it via capsules. And so you just take a capsule and do it that way. But that is something I did for about 30 days afterwards. And then I did very high dose probiotic. This is going to sound like a lot to some people, but I did 1 trillion probiotics a day. Most of the time people hear 50 billion, 20 billion, 100 billion CFU, maybe even 400.
Yeah.
But I was doing 1 trillion a day. And that really made a difference. I mean, I can tell you right now that when I think about antibiotics, they don't kill off billions when you take antibiotics for a month. It's not killing billions of bacteria. It's killing trillions. So I wanted to replace trillions and also do a lot of good, prebiotics, postbiotics with that. So I took a large amount of probiotics. My diet was primarily organic meat, steamed vegetables. I also did quite a few sweet potatoes. And some white potatoes, and I did fruit, and that was pretty much my diet for the most part. I also when I was doing the antibiotics, I did a little bit of clay, not a lot, just a little. But I really think the probiotics were doing the high doses along with the FMT were the most therapeutic things I did in terms of gut health. I also took some things for kind of cellular health. I took a multi-organ supplement and a methylated B complex and something to support glutathione production and NAC plus some other herbs to support glutathione for kind of cellular mitochondrial health and protection. And then I also got some acupuncture, and then I would also do some magnesium. One of the big things I struggled with because I wasn't able to walk was constipation. And so I would do sort of an old therapy, and that was probiotics plus a tablespoon. I would alternate flaxseed oil and cod liver oil every other day. And then I would do some prune juice and then magnesium, typically about 600 milligrams. And I did that, and that really helped. Along with some of the acupuncture. So that's some of the treatment I did. But I mean, I learned so much about regenerative medicine. I also think stem cells is phenomenal if you find the right practitioner. So I mean, this is part of what caused it, but I went back and got stem cell to help my disc heal, and that really helped tremendously. Then I had some patients with inflammatory bowel disease. I recommended go and get this done via stem cell IV.
So sorry, you had stem cell a third time, but I'm assuming, did you go to a different clinic or, what was the
clinic? Yeah.
Okay.
Now, let me tell you what's crazy. I mean, the clinic where I got this done is the largest, most prestigious, probably stem cell clinic in the United States where it happened. And I was clean. I mean, they did everything right. I looked online. It was literally almost like it was 1 in 250,000 chance of something like this happening. Because it can happen. Listen, if somebody goes in for a knee replacement or shoulder surgery, I mean, on occasion it can get affected even when you do everything right.
Right.
And so that's essentially what happened in my case there. I'll tell you this too. I mean, the hardest part of it all was just the mindset around it. I mean, I had these beliefs kept creeping in like, well, maybe you can heal, but you'll never get back to 100%, or those doctors' words. And I had experienced this when I had patients. Patients would come in and their doctors would tell them something like, hey, your condition's irreversible, or you're going to have to be on this drug for the rest of your life. So I had to battle those same sort of, mental, spiritual battles myself. And that's where I wrote a book during this time. And the book's called Think This, Not That. And I really focused on and knew this book talking about mindset medicine. I really believe the most important part of healing is sort of my mindsets and thoughts and beliefs around how I'm going to heal. And there's some great research behind that. But that was something else I really practiced during this time. I think all the things I did with the high probiotics, the FMT, the diet was really essential. There's a lot of herbs I took, like astragalus and ginger and some others I think that were crucial to healing. But I think the mindset was just as important as anything else when it came to healing.
Yeah, let's talk about the mindset for a second, because one of the things that you say in your book, which I love, and we may have discussed this in a previous episode on the podcast, but in your story, the story of your life, be the hero, not the victim. It's kind of an exercise that you can go through. Picture you're
Yeah.
watching a movie of your own life. Do you want to be the person you're showing up as, the person who's maybe complaining and griping and always finding the negative, or do you want to be the person who looks to the positive and sort of overcomes and becomes the person who you want to be, or you be proud to be? I love that framing. And I think in your case, especially like you were just saying, contending with the doctor who is telling you, well, you may never walk again, that had to be a really kind of like Sisyphus-like uphill battle mentally. So yeah, I'd love for you to expand upon that concept.
Yeah. So when I met with this doctor, it was, and first off, I knew he was going to be more negative just because I think that generally speaking, conventional medicine teaches doctors to be that way, give you the worst case scenario. However, part of me feels like it's breaking the Hippocratic Oath from this standpoint. I mean, if you give somebody the worst case scenario, it's doing harm. I mean, the reality is that people heal better when they have hope and when they believe they can have a good outcome. I mean, every medical study ever has shown that. I mean, going all the way back to the placebo effect and how it was first demonstrated, or at least what's kicked off a lot of the way we run modern studies today. During World War I, there was a physician who ran out of morphine. And that was the drug they gave everybody. I mean, the fallen soldiers, you can imagine excruciating pain. They were given the drug morphine, which is an incredibly powerful pain-killing drug. And he ran out. And so, but he felt like he had to give them something. So he literally started giving them sugar pills. And the craziest part about that is that 30 to 40% of them saw the same level of pain relief.
Yeah, it's wild.
As if they were taking the drug morphine. I mean, think about that. You can create within your own body pain relieving chemicals as strong as morphine.
Right.
And we know that the placebo effect has been proven over and over and over again. And we know that the placebo effect has been proven in modern science. It's also talked about in every religious text ever. I mean, when you read the Bible, Jesus is constantly saying, your faith has healed you. Your belief has healed you. I mean, what you think about these heal you. I mean, he says, if you believe and say to the mountain, move, it'll move. I mean, so all that being said, you have to believe that. I was reading this paper and I'm trying to remember the name of the author. It was by a PhD, and he said, you can amplify the placebo effect. He said, here's how you do it is, number one, you need to know exactly what it is you want. Okay, and believe so I want to experience pain relief, or I want to experience complete healing of my GI issues, whatever it is. You have to know this is exactly what I want, and you have to visualize and picture it. So, Michael, for me, I was months before throwing my 2-year-old daughter in the air in the pool. And I was out swimming, biking, running, weightlifting. So I wanted to do that again. So I would picture myself throwing my 2-year-old in the pool, going out for a run. Like I pictured it. I said, this is what I want in my mind. I saw it really clearly. And then he says, and then while you're picturing that, you need to be in that moment now emotionally. You need to make your body believe that, hey, this is where I'm headed. And so I would throw my daughter in the air in the pool, imagine that. And then I would also imagine how it's going to feel 1 year from now when I was, laughing with her, excited, feeling that joy. And then he said, the third thing you need to do he said, is you need to create a very specific plan to prove to yourself, this is how this will happen. You need to sort of reverse engineer, how this will become my reality. Because the thing that he started getting into was, because your nervous system and subconscious don't always believe you. I mean, you could be the person, toxic positivity, and saying, I'm perfect, everything's wonderful, I'm going to heal. But a lot of times deep down, it doesn't, you're saying it, but you don't believe you.
And I think we've all known
And
someone who is that way. I think you said it really well, toxic positivity, where it just seems like this masquerade of positivity, but it doesn't seem genuine. It doesn't seem like it's really heartfelt or deeply believed.
yes, exactly. And so then he said, you just create a plan. And so I did that. I wrote down, okay, here I'm going to take, these probiotics in the morning. I'm going to eat this, and I'm going to crawl out the pool. I'm going to do this therapy in the pool, and I'll do, and I wrote out exactly what I was going to do for the next 12 months in order to heal. And I followed it. And after following all of this, I do want to say, like, I'm probably close to 80, I'm probably about 85% now back. I'm back. I'm weight training. I am swimming. I am able to carry my daughter, which I wasn't able to do for a year. I'm not quite back 100% yet because because this takes a long time to heal. I
Yeah.
talked to someone else who had a spinal infection, and they said it took them 3 years before they felt like, okay, I'm back to 100%
Right.
now. But I am going to get back to 100%. I think by the end of this year, I will be.
And
And
congrats on
so,
being as far as you are. I mean, that's got to feel amazing coming from crawling to and from the pool.
well, yeah, it feels amazing. I feel grateful. I feel very grateful because I know that I could be in a situation where I would have had to have rods in my spine, or I couldn't, walk or exercise or do the things I'm back doing now. So I'm incredibly grateful to God. I give him a big part of the credit because there were divine things, him leading me to people and learning things and just all of those. And so I really believe that there's so much to be grateful for there from him. And I'm also grateful for all the things I've learned. I mean, if I have somebody, like if somebody has ever been on antibiotics and high doses and they have extreme amount of damage there, I really know a very specific, here is the exact protocol, what you need to do. I think I really know very well for what people need to do if they have a major injury. How do you continually regenerate and heal from everything from a torn ACL 20 years ago to bone on bone pain, to herniated disc in the back. And so having experienced some of those things, I think I know exactly what to do clinically to help those people, which is really something that again, I'm grateful for. And I had that same thing I experienced with my mom when my mom had cancer the first time, and then a second time beat it naturally. We really learned so much from that I was able to then apply and use with the people I work with. So there's definitely an element of, taking lemons and lemonade. And what you talked about earlier is you were talking about the seeing ourselves in the story. And for a couple days, I saw myself as this victim. And I realized, no, I need to be the hero in the story. I need to, and what does the hero do? The hero wants something and they go for it. They're not the victim. They move, they take action, and they try and bless others along the way. I was really conscious of that too, of that I'm not going to complain. I'm going to show to my 2-year-old daughter what it's like to walk through something hard in life with your best foot forward, with a lot
Love
of
that.
integrity, without
Love that.
complaining, with a grateful
Yeah.
attitude.
Yeah. And, there's something here I'm hoping you'll share, because for people who are listening to this who maybe are in the throes of those dark moments, what did you do when you had those dark moments? Because as someone who's also had some of those dark moments, you set your North Star, right? I'm going to be hero.
Yeah.
I'm going to be positive. But at least for myself, I can say there are moments when I would just break down and cry because the suffering
Yeah.
just seems so heavy. And it's like, all right, I'm going to do this. It's going to work out. But there are those moments that just break your faith. What
Yeah.
what was your internal dialogue, or how did you help to get yourself out of those moments?
Well, one, I did have those moments. So even after that 48 hours of feeling the worst I'd felt, I had another period of time, like about 2 weeks in, before I'd felt any improvement, where I'm like, this isn't working. I mean, I just
Yeah.
felt so bad. And I remember just, holding my wife's hand and just, crying because it was very, very hard, just thinking about, will I walk again? Some of those things. And so I definitely had those moments. One of the things I realized as I went through this is that what we fix our eyes on is the most important thing. So if our eyes are fixed on the negative thing that the diagnosis the doctor gave me, if my eyes are fixed on the negative things I read online, if my eyes are fixed on even just negative TV or music, any of those things, it'll lead me down a bad path. Versus if I fix my eyes on God, if I fix my eyes on, here's an example of something I did. Rather than reading about the worst case scenario online, I went and found 1 or 2 cases of the best cases,
Yeah.
and I only focused on those.
Love that.
And this is a principle of success in every area of anyone's life. I mean, if you want to succeed financially, don't focus on what the average person's doing. What is the top 1% of the top 1%? What do they do with their finances? What does Warren Buffett do? What does Elon Musk do? What does Kathy Wood do? What do they do? Well, do that. Fix your eyes on that. Think that. Okay, that's why I called it think this, not that. I go through this is exactly what you should be fixing your mind on and
Well,
how to
also,
heal.
Josh, not to cut off your train of thought, I
Yeah.
strongly agree with all this. This is one of the reasons why at the clinic we are pretty discouraging of people spending too much time on a SIBO message board or,
Yes.
something like that, because you end up just getting the people who need to vent. And I understand that, right? But to your point, you end up seeing a lot of the worst case scenario people who just need to talk and vent and share. And it oftentimes, I would say the majority of times, makes people have this worst case scenario as the norm perspective.
Yeah. What you brought up is important, and this is also why there's so many mental health issues today. There was a psychologist, and she was talking about this recently, and she said she labeled it as rumination.
Sure.
And she said, when we talk about and think about our problem over and over and over again, in fact, Michael, I'll tell you, the number one reason why hard cases don't heal that I've had is this. And this is true according to Chinese medicine as well. They believe this as well. If you are a person and you're struggling with something, could be Lyme disease, could be IBD, whatever it is, and you think about your condition all the time. It's the only thing you think about. You're doing research, you're thinking about, to the point where you might even be doing things that are good for you, but because you're thinking about it so much, it harms your health. In fact, overthinking and obsessing about things in Chinese medicine is known to cause, they call it a spleen qi deficiency. But essentially, spleen qi deficiency in Chinese medicine means weak digestion. So if you overthink and worry and obsess, do any of those things, it weakens your digestive system. It pulls your digestive energy and it'll keep you from healing. And so that's why, I tell patients, and I had to do this myself, where it's like, okay, well, first off, I was in bed. I couldn't, it was very hard not to think about because I couldn't do anything.
Sure. Fair enough.
But I didn't. I wrote a book. I spent time with my 2-year-old. Like I couldn't throw up in the air, but she would crawl in bed with me and she'd watch Paw Patrol or something, and I would crawl out to a pool and do things. I was doing very little to think about my condition, very little. I had my plan and I did that. That's what I did. I followed my plan. That's the only time. So I hardly ever thought about it. One of the biggest reasons why you're not healing is you are thinking about your condition too much. You're letting it obsess your life. And you might say to yourself, well, I'm exhausted and this. Still, just have a plan and follow it. And if you feel fatigued, go lay down. But don't think about how, I'm not getting better, or should I do something different, or worry about it. Just go lay down and take a nap. Go and do something. And you need to schedule things. If you've got a condition, schedule to do things you love to do on a regular basis to where you're not overthinking. But to your point there, yes, it is a huge, huge thing to where people's thoughts drain certain organs, making them more ill. And so for myself, going back to this, I really fixed my eyes on, I spent a lot of time, when I was feeling bad, I praised God. I put on a Christian worship music and I would just thank God. I would read through the Psalms. If I needed to vent, here's what I would do. I didn't vent to everybody. I had like a friend of mine, Dan. I had my wife and I had my father-in-law. And it was pretty much those three people. And I would just say to them, I would say, I need to vent for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. And I would just vent for 5 minutes. And then typically Chelsea or father, they'd pray for me and afterwards, and I'd say, okay. And actually, I met the psychologist, and I thought this is a really good idea because he addresses this, and he said, what you need to do is, most people have these level of kind of constant venting all day, and it's really toxic to them.
Yeah.
And he said, what I do is, he said, I literally get a 5-minute timer out. Okay, like one of those
like
little
that.
white timers. He does this
Yeah.
with patients. And he said, okay, you can vent, but you have 5 minutes to do it, okay? And you can do it 5 minutes up to 3 times a day. And he has them do a timer. He said, eventually, they get down to where, I get them down to where, like, you can do 1 minute once a day. You really got to make this good, really vet and go. And so, but I've actually found that to be incredibly therapeutic for people knowing you can't complain. 5 minutes a day you can, okay, or 5 minutes 3 times a day, but you can't make it your all day thing. And to your point, those message boards for that reason really are not very helpful in most cases. And so, but yeah, that's sort of some of what I personally, what I personally did.
Yeah. And a few things I'll just share is not feeling well has helped me to find more empathy, right? There
Yes.
might be moments when I'm not feeling well, and let's say I'm walking around the block, and normally I say hi to people. I'm very friendly, but there were some moments where I was just feeling so terrible. I didn't want to say hi to a single person. Now, there are
Yeah.
cases when I've been the person who felt snubbed, and the
Hmm.
internal dialogue would be, well, look at this jerk, not even going to say hi to me. And it gave me a
Yeah.
flip of, you know what? Don't be so quick to judge the other person if they're not friendly or whatever, because you don't
Yeah.
know what they're going through. So one would be empathy. The other thing that I've done on a few occasions is feeling tired, not liking that I didn't have the energy to work or to exercise, whatever. And I said, you know what? Let me just take a moment since I can't do much else. I bought a stack of cards, like thank you cards, and I would just write like a card to my mom, card to my friend,
Wow.
thank you. Here's what I appreciate about you. And it was such a nice supplantation of me kind of having a pity party to, well, let me just make use of this time and practice thankfulness for the people in my life. So those are two things that I found helpful for any of you listening to or watching this that you may also want to try.
That's so good. Yeah, I did something similar. My mom and dad took care of me for part of it, my father-in-law, my wife, and so I wrote them notes during the process as well. But that's a great exercise. I love that. So good.
So, Josh, what else? Anything else on the GI front? I think you gave a pretty great protocol there, and I might ping you for a connection to a few of the FMT clinics because that might be a
Yeah.
fun follow-up podcast or two. And I think the high dose probiotics is interesting. We've discussed oftentimes on the podcast, we've been developing these sort of evidence-based dose ranges for different probiotics. And you're right, most of them top out at about 50 billion. There are some studies that go significantly higher, but 1 trillion is quite high. However, I do think it's an interesting use case when people are going to be on high dose antibiotics for a long period of time. Bearing in mind, most antibiotic
Yeah.
courses are like 2 weeks, and you were, what was it, 3 months?
Well, I was on 1 month. It was going to be 3 months. I was able to cut it down to 1 month.
Okay,
But still, I mean, these are powerful. It was a powerful antibiotic.
right.
So
And you were doing, was it both oral and IV?
I just did IV. It was one called
Okay.
vancomycin.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah.
Gotcha. Anything else on the gut front? Again, I think you did a pretty good job of laying out some advice for people.
Yeah, I mean, I think the general principles for gut health, one, from a food standpoint, I think consuming foods that are very easy to digest. I mean, that's the idea. I think that when I run into, we had a pretty big keto and paleo focus for quite a few years. And my focus is very Chinese medicine. And so if somebody has this in Chinese medicine, the other thing they'll do, and I did some of this, is rice congee. And I know that for some doctors, they recommend no grains ever, but rice, when it's cooked a very long time, I did very, very well with it. And almost everybody I've ever given it has done very, very well with it. If it's a rice congee, I did a basmati and just made it to where it's mush. And
And
so
sorry,
doing
what is
that
a
and
kanji? A kanji is just like a slow cooked,
it,
long duration.
yes, it means it's just slow cooked in a crock pot for a long time. People tend to either do chicken broth in it or just water and salt. And so I would do that. And in Chinese medicine, there's a lot of different kanjis. And so for different things, so what they'll do is the base is rice and water, rice and broth. But if, let's say, your digestive system is too cold, which would be like IBS-D, okay, IBS with diarrhea, then they'll have you add warming herbs to it. Like it'll probably be a cinnamon and a ginger and a clove as a base in there. And then sometimes they'll even add meat. So the kanji is kind of like the base of the medicine that they give you. And then if you need to cool it, well, then it's going to be peppermint and skullcap and some other things to cool the digestive inflammation. Or if we need to start moving things, there's a lack of movement. Well, then maybe it's turmeric and it's some other things. And so like dandelion greens, but that's kind of the way that works in Chinese medicine. And they'll have people eat it 3 times a day. It's pretty much like you do this rice and water. It's almost the only thing, or rice and broth. And then we'll either add some meat to it or vegetables or herbs. And this is sort of like, that's, because they didn't have capsules then. So they had pretty much everybody got their medicine via this kanji or soups or teas.
Sure.
And so that's kind of the way it worked.
Yeah. And the way we've discussed this, or at least like a heuristic we've been developing, is people's guts tend to bifurcate, just as a general heuristic, into bacterial overgrowth or fungal overgrowth types. And I think the rice sounds amazing for sort of your classical IBS SIBO type patient. Probably
Yes.
probably might flare someone who's a fungal type, and this is where they do
Yeah.
well. To your earlier point, the paleo keto diet, I think, serves the fungal overgrowth community or type really well, and then vice versa. The IBS SIBO type gut may not do well on like the really high level of fibers and greens because it is kind of irritating.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, your distinction there between the two, it makes sense to me because again, people with SIBO do really well with what I just
Sure.
shared, really well.
Yep.
But yeah, that makes sense.
So the book, do you want to tell us a little bit more about the book? Think This, Not That. I'm sure it's available everywhere, but is there a website where there's a, onboarding or what would you offer
Yeah.
people?
Yeah. Hey, one more thing before the book, just to kind of
Please.
close out the gut
Yeah,
conversation for
yeah.
everybody. Again, I think if you've got a gut issue, remember a few things. One, the mindset is very important. It's very, very important. Do not overlook it because, and I've worked with tens of thousands of patients, and for many of them, either healing or not healing is just as dependent upon their thoughts and mindset around it as is the food they're eating. So it is incredibly important. So don't forget that. The second is the diet we talked about here. Some of these general principles I've taught that Dr. Michael, I'm sure, has teaches constantly. Really try and follow that. Lay out a very specific plan for yourself. Also, supplementally, I really like probiotics. I really like bone broth protein. I really like or collagen, something like that. I really like astragalus as an herb. That was used especially if you have a form of autoimmunity tied to some sort of inflammatory bowel disease. It's very strengthening long term for those sort of conditions. I like licorice root a lot. And I think zinc and vitamin D are two really important nutrients that a lot of people are missing there as well when it comes to gut health. And there are more things, but I think those are some prime things. And then, I think hyperbaric oxygen therapy is great if you also have a infection with this. And if you have an infection, whether it be mold or Lyme, I really like doing ozone IVs combined with hyperbaric chamber. I
And
think
when
it's
you and
really
sorry, when you
good for
say ozone IVs, are you referring to doing the 10 pass, like the Lahadmi
yeah,
method?
yeah, like a 10 pass or an EBU, something like that.
Gotcha. Okay. And for our audience,
Yeah.
there's different protocols with the 10 pass. You pull out blood, you ozonate it, you recirculate it, and you do that 10 times. So it gives you 10 times the dose that you see when comparing to some of the clinics that are a little less medical and a little bit more trendy, where it's like a quick IV of vitamin C or glutathione. As good as that can be, they might do just a one pass. And if we're talking
Yeah.
about a more significant infection, I think the jury's out on this, but you may not really get a clinical, really strong effect unless you do the 10 passes. So just to paint that distinction for people.
I agree. Yeah, and that's a great distinction. So I think doing ozone with hyperbaric for infections, along with the high dose probiotic, and if you are taking antibiotic or taking some sort of herbal antibiotic, I think you can do that in conjunction with it too. One of the interesting things about hyperbaric is now this was for a disc infection, but in the study they talk about how one of the issues with the disc is that getting antibiotics there is that's why you have to do it so long because it's the blood supply is so low. But when you get into hyperbaric, that oxygen is then compressed deeper into the cells and tissues of the body. And so with a lot of people with infections, they have these infections hiding in different, I mean, that's the terminology a lot of people use, but hiding, but they're deep within some organs. So hyperbaric is very beneficial for a lot of those people with infections too. So I think that's something else to look into, along with if you just really feel like your system is beat up, stem cell IVs are very good. There's a doc that I see in Cancun. His name is Dr. Rafael Gonzalez. The company's called ReHealth. So just RE Health. I think they're the best stem cell clinic in the world for autoimmune disease, inflammatory bowel disease. I've got a doctor who's a very prominent physician in the gut health world who had ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, went down there, and he's sent so many patients, they just saw really good results. So I do think those are some good things. And then from the mindset standpoint, again, I wrote this book called Think This, Not That, and it's the best book I've ever written. I've written a lot of books about different health topics, everything from natural cures to healing leaky gut to, a book on the keto diet. And I think that if you're a person wanting to really embrace mindset medicine in order to heal, this book has so many powerful principles of how to heal. I mean, even things like knowing your identity, finding your purpose, how to become the hero, overcoming limiting beliefs. I mean, that's one of the biggest things I'll say. So many people have limiting beliefs about themselves and their body. I mentioned this earlier. A lot of times people go to their doctors and their doctors will tell them, you got to be on this drug the rest of your life, your condition's irreversible, or something like that. And the reality is most conditions are reversible, or at least vastly improvable. Like, even if I had somebody come in with, here's an example, type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes would be very hard to reverse. I think there's a few cases where it's been done, but it's very hard and very rare for that to actually happen. Very, very rare. However, do I feel really confident saying I could have somebody come in with type 1 diabetes and I could greatly improve their health and even lower the amount of medications they're on? Yeah, I do. I can say with confidence, I've done that really consistently with a lot of people. So anyways, I think it's important.
And Josh, just to add one thing here, as much as I try to be very guided by the scientific research, there is a challenge with that, in that you're going to have more research where there's funding. And so there's a limitation. So this is one thing I do think the conventional doctors do well, is they cite the evidence. But the thing I feel they're not totally aware of is, where might there be a paucity of really robust randomized control trials, but there's some smaller studies, maybe they're observational in nature, maybe there's clinicians doing this sort of off-label, if you will, seeing good results. And that's what I think needs to be better brought into conventional medicine is, well, officially the data say this, but there's also limitations of studying X, Y, or Z. So maybe a trial on the herb or the HBOT, even though there's not great studies on HBOT, let's say for Lyme disease, there are some case reports that are super compelling. So I'll just add that for our audience. Like we say, we want to be evidence guided, but not evidence limited, and not stop thinking where the evidence ends.
Well, I think one of the issues we run into here with our conventional medical system and research is that it is very it's very biased.
Sure.
I recently did an episode on my podcast, and for anyone who wants to listen, it's called the Dr.Axe Show, and I get into this. This is mind blowing. There is a researcher, and he came up with a study showing approximately 51% of studies, when you read the headlines, they're false. So think about that, 51%. And he goes through a checklist, and there's 6 main items. I'm going to recall most of them, but he says, here's what he gives an example of. How many studies show that red meat decreases lifespan, and how many show it increases lifespan? It's almost, there's a lot on both sides. There are studies showing that eggs are terrible or great for you. There's studies showing tomatoes are bad or good for you. There's studies showing dairy. And then the same goes with a lot of medication. So he says, when you actually look at it, it is almost 50-50, whether if you read a headline of something on social media or read an article of this, this study discovered this, a lot of times it's false. And he said, one big reason is, one of the biggest ones is the financial interests. He said that is probably one of the biggest issues that really causes somebody to find false evidence, because they sort of manipulate the study to find something. They sort of force it that way. The other thing is cherry picking data. The other thing is that they're very small sample size. If you have a study on 20 people and it's never been reproduced, like there's never a second or third study. All that being said, to your
dogma
point,
also, Josh, we've experienced this in the handful of papers we've published. We sometimes hit the dogma of the peer reviewers. And you'd think that the people who are doing the peer review for the journal are going to be very objective, but humans are human, right? And the peer reviewers may have a select bias of studies that they think about. And so some research, even if it's great, can't get past a gatekeeper of peer review without sort of changing the headline, changing the language, and it can be challenging. I still think science wins, but even science is fallible, and I guess we can make the same argument bringing back religion, right? I think religion is a very, very good thing, but people can spin things the way they want them to be
Of
spun.
course.
And we keep getting in the way, I
It's
guess.
happened constantly throughout history. I mean,
Yeah,
wars have been fought over that. So yeah, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. One of the things that's important with science is that it lives on a bed of ethics, because if not, you're always going to get false studies, and that's why those things should be always combined there. So yeah, I'm with you, but I do think that, for, again, going back to the main point here, overcoming those limiting beliefs is really a key. I had a patient, Michael, years ago, and she developed autoimmune disease. And this is before she saw me. She came in to see me. And we found that it was around the time her daughter left home is when she developed this. And part of it was she had so much grief from missing her daughter. I mean, there are a lot of things that are mindset related that are making us sick that we just don't realize it. And I think that, Western medicine has sort of made everything material and tried to remove the spiritual and even mental emotional components, a big part of it, from medicine. And the reality is these things all affect the mind-body connection is incredibly powerful, and you
sure.
don't want to disregard that. You want to use that in your favor. If you're trying to heal from something, use mindset, use spiritual growth, use that in your favor. One thing I get into the book is how to overcome limiting beliefs. And limiting beliefs almost always start with a memory. We had something happen in our past. Typically, somebody said something to us, like a teacher, a parent, a pastor, a coach, and they said something, and we still are living that out today. We still believe, hey, I'm not smart, I'm not pretty, I can't heal, I do have to be on this drug, whatever it is. And it's important that we go back and recognize this is when it started. Here's the thing I need to replace it with and believe, and then start with a new sort of mental narrative.
Yeah.
It's really, really important for healing.
Which is also why I think with children, and especially when we're working with children in a clinical setting, we want to choose our words so carefully and always
Yes.
frame things positively. You don't have to avoid these foods. There's nothing wrong with you, but we can focus on these foods, and you may notice you have even better energy, rather than, well, if you eat this, you're going to be sick, right? Just the way we frame these things, especially with kids. I have such a soft spot in my heart because of what you just
Yeah.
said. We really want to choose our words carefully.
Yep, yep. I couldn't agree more. Well, yeah. So I would say that generally speaking, and people can go and find the book. It's called Think This, Not That. It's on Amazon.com, bookstores nationwide. It was a New York Times bestseller. People were really saying they really felt like it's helped them with healing via mindset and also just living their best life possible. So I'd encourage everybody to get it. You could go to Amazon and just search Josh Axe Think This, and you'll see it on Amazon.com. And by the way, if you get the book and then you go to joshaxe.com, I've got a lot of free bonuses. So if you just go on there and let us know, hey, I bought the book on joshaxe.com. Once you have it, we'll give you a free workbook with it, and a video series, and a number of other things to help people grow in mindset and grow in their health.
Sweet. Well, Josh, I really appreciate the fact that you're sharing your story and making the most out of it. I'm glad that you're mobile and on the path. And I'm sorry that happened, but boy, it sounds like that's going to have a silver lining, in the sense that the amount of people you're going to be able to help with just sharing your story and how to help people get the mindset aspect right. Because I do agree with you that there are some people that, as clinicians, we can get all the biochemistry right, if you will, but if the mindset's not there, it's just an anchor that's going to prevent forward progress. So love the work and love what you're doing.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me.